Gaming Guidance Season 2. That's 2, right, Mike?
No, we're done with season 2.
Season 3. Sorry,
Here
season
we go.
3, everyone.
3's a magic number.
3. All right, so Mike, you set this one up, man. So intro us in.
Yeah. All right. So welcome back everybody for season 3 of Gaming Guide Den. We got a very special guest for you today. Our guest today is Yoshiaki Ikeda, an English to Japanese translator who has worked on such games as Chained Echoes, Harvest Island, Window Garden, Pocket Mirror Golden Traum, Arcadian Atlas, and Bendy and the Dark Revival. Yoshiaki, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
It's a real treat for us. It's a real treat. We've had a lot of translators on, but you're the first to come on from the other side of things, of English to Japanese. So it's a real
That's great.
All right. Okay, so we've got a number of questions to ask you, and we might find ourselves on some tangents and all, trying to just discuss everything with you, because it's really, really interesting to us to hear this situation from the other perspective of bringing the artwork into Japan. But let's start out with some of your background. Okay, so please tell us about your language learning history, as a learner of Japanese growing up, right? Because everyone, even their first language they learn, and anything then about also learning English or any other languages as well.
So I grew up in Japan, where Japanese is my native language, though I picked up some English along the way. So basically, I was raised in monolingual culture, but I basically studied English in schools.
Okay.
But I was a very sickly kid, always staying in the school library while other kids enjoyed sports outside. But I think I found comfort in, school library, surrounded by countless books. But I can't even remember what books I read there. But I think maybe that experience contributed to my language learning, to my Japanese and English.
Do you mean to say that you were reading books in English as well at that time?
A little bit. Of course, there's Japanese library, so majority of books there were, Japanese, but there are some English books. So I tried to read that, even I didn't know any English. I didn't even know alphabet back in the days, but I used a tiny dictionary and looked up every words in the books and tried to read that. Wow. And that was a really hard time, but I think that kind of contributed my, English learning, I guess.
Yeah. Wow. Did you read a lot of books in translation as well? Works from, say, European or American authors?
Yes. Again, I don't really remember what books I read, but yeah, there are, books, translated books in the library as well. Yeah. I think one of the books I read were The Adventure of Tom Sawyer.
Oh yeah,
I think
that's definitely a classic.
Kind of classic one.
That's really interesting.
So you were learning this on your own outside of class.
Nowadays, Japanese government is very focusing on English education. So even elementary school students got education, English education in elementary school. But back in my days, there's no English classes in elementary school. So I didn't have any knowledge about education in elementary school. So I didn't know any in English at that moment.
That is a little surprising, but I mean, I know that the English education in elementary school was very limited. Both Andrew and I worked in Japan as English language teachers, so we have some experience there.
Yeah. So you should know how in Japanese the English education in Japan looks like.
Yeah. It was in its infancy. It felt. I first went there in 2001. So this is really turning back the clock on a very different experience. And then I went back in 2005. And that's, it seemed like big changes at the time, and now looking back, it's like 20 years. But yeah, not much had changed really from 2001 to 2005.
Yeah. 4 years doesn't change. Doesn't change much, I think.
When we were in Japan, we were in Tokyo, in the Tokyo area. We were in Saitama, close enough. And I remember hearing that, there's elementary school English classes in this area, but if you went out to the country, they might not have. Well, some really country areas, they might not have English at all. I heard, or they definitely didn't start until maybe high school, maybe middle school. So yeah, elementary school was definitely like a more built up area kind of thing.
Right.
So you were in an area that had this in elementary school.
I guess so.
Okay.
Yeah, I know there are some, different education system, even in Japan, but I mean, there's no English classes in my elementary school. So basically, during my period, I learned everything by myself.
That's some real drive, some real personal motivation. Much respect to you.
You felt better.
Yeah, but
you felt like this was something you were good at from an early age. Did you feel that way?
I guess so.
Okay.
But again, like I was a very sickly kid, and everyone was entering sports outside, and I didn't have anything to do while they were playing outside. So like all I can do was like, staying in the library and like doing something. So that's something, I did.
Yeah.
Okay, got it.
Yeah, that's interesting. Right. So what about as you got older, did you focus on this in college? Was your degree in English language study or literature or anything like that?
As a matter of fact, I didn't major English, but my major is literary arts, which is, kind of for those aspiring to become novelists or writers.
Yeah,
got it.
Well, you are, right? As a translator, you're basically becoming the Japanese language writer for these English language works. So
yeah, exactly. Yeah. So I'm like, you can say my dream came true.
That's great.
And English was your favorite class? Was it your favorite class growing up, pretty much, or
in the high school or years?
Yeah, I love Japanese classes as well, and I also loved English classes.
Oh, so yeah, you're bunkei. You're very much like
language
guy.
Yeah.
You're a language guy. Yeah,
I'm language guy, definitely. Yes.
Yeah, I understand. I'm pretty much the same way. In America, we always have to calculate the tip after we, at a restaurant, and it involves math. I never want to do it. I hate it. I want to tell people I'm bunkei whenever I'm doing when people are calculating the tip here.
Is there any word equivalent to bunkei in English?
I think that's a sort of a Japanese idea. I love that. I love it, but I'm not sure if it's entirely scientific. But
we don't have.
I think you should say you're a language guy. You say you're a language guy. People bring up the left brain and right brain difference sometimes.
Right. Yeah.
So if you're, what is it, left brain, that means it's like language, I think language and logical and, science maybe, I'm not sure. And then right brain is, no, wait. Yeah, right brain is the visual and artistic side, and if you're if you're right brain heavy, you have a left hand. You're left-handed, and a lot of artists actually are left-handed. I feel like.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
And if we got that wrong, just know it's because we are not scientifically minded.
But if we got it wrong, we'd love for you to just fill up the comments section. So blow us up that way.
There's no term bunkei, but there is a term that I've held on to for many years. There was a movie that I loved from a comedy group. Used to do a show called The State. And they had this movie called Wet Hot American Summer. And there's a part where the one character goes to the summer camp, and he's asking to find some students there, or some kids. And he's like, where are the indoor kids? And everybody knows what that means. Like the kids who are staying indoors instead of playing out and doing sports at all. And so I've often referred to myself as an indoor kid.
I think you
too.
Yeah, I think you probably could get away with saying I'm a language guy, not a math guy. Mm-hmm. And people will understand immediately what you're saying. So if you want to translate bunke and like like that, then that's a way to do it, I think, personally.
All right, so let's talk a little bit about your work now. All right, Andrew, why don't you take this question?
Okay, so when you do translation work, do you usually work freelance or with a company? And do you have any preferences as far as that's concerned?
I do both, and I'm open to either. Like if you're doing translation professionally, like you inevitably have to do both, because like you kind of have to open your doors to any opportunities. Mm-hmm. But I think you typically need to expect different work environment between the two. Mm-hmm. And also this can be also influenced by your mental and physical condition at the same time. Like major or famous like AAA titles usually go through translation companies for making processes easier. And you can also, you may be able to connect with other translators and project managers. Mm-hmm. And on the other side, in my experience, freelance projects without companies tend to involve much smaller teams. Mm-hmm. So it's just the difference of work environment. But ultimately, I think it comes down to who you want to work with, which project you want to dedicate your energy to, and your timing and availability.
Okay, so it's more about the art and the media than the style of work.
Yeah, I think so. Yeah.
Okay. What are you most drawn to? What most interests you to work with?
It really depends. Like, I like JRPG. So if there are like, any games related to JRPG or narrative-driven, story-rich games, of course, I want to work on the translation if I see such game in the market. But maybe they are already teaming up with other translation companies or other teams and stuff. So I don't know from which outlet such task comes down to me. Mm-hmm. So so it really depends on which project or which games or any opportunities.
Yeah, that's not surprising because obviously I mentioned before we started our interview and everything that I had come across your name and your work when playing Chained Echoes. So
yeah.
All right.
Is there
that was.
Go ahead.
Yeah, go ahead.
Oh.
No, go ahead.
I was just wondering, is there like in Japan, like there's Haken Gaisha, like dispatch companies for translators? Is that how it works generally? Because a lot of, even recently, YouTube talent and all that, and maybe even TikTokers in Japan, they'll sign to an agency, which is not a thing in America, really.
Oh, really?
Not at all. But it's great. I love that idea. I wish that we did it. I think Japan's got the right idea.
Really?
Yeah. When you're freelance in America, it's like, go survive. I hope you make it. There's no or die. We don't care. But like in Japan, it's like we have an agency for you if you got the talent, which I think is wonderful. But is there anything like that with translators?
But like, Yeah, there's a Hakken in Japan
Yeah.
who handles translations, but it's kind of same as you freelance individually because like they offer task to me, but it's based on the contract and based on the word rates, and they don't have any insurance or they don't have any like guarantees or base salary or something. So it's basically go survive style. Even you have contract with like the companies. So
But they
I
take
think it's just the
they would
same.
take a cut if they got you a job though, right? Is that how it works?
Right.
Yeah, okay. Cool. Got it.
So how did you get started in this field, right? It's, translation is a very specific application of language and literary skills. How did you get started?
Mm-mm-mm. So yeah, I majored literary arts in university, and after graduating from university, I actually started my career as a teacher. Actually,
Oh, hey, welcome to the club.
just like you two.
What?
But
Go on.
however, like if you major literary arts, like uh, you know, you want to be writer or novelist or like kind of stuff, right? So one of my ambitions was to work at a book publisher. So even I became a teacher, I eventually decided to leave teaching at some timing. But and I applied to multiple book publishers, but the hiring processes for those positions were so long and exhausting. And I soon find myself working at a different company, which is marketing firm.
Okay. Yeah.
And at that company, I was unexpectedly put in charge of translation tasks.
Wow. That's pretty
And
weird.
Okay.
But all right.
yeah,
But they were like, "Oh, you're good at
and of
English. You
course,
got it."
yeah,
Pretty
yeah,
much.
yeah, yeah. I guess so.
Wow. So what was your first translation work following that position where you didn't really choose to be a translator for the marketing firm? But where did you go first after that?
So that was marketing firm, and so yeah, based on that experience, I tried to do some marketing related translation after I left the marketing firm,
Yeah.
and then that was the time. Also, the time in the translation industry was a lot of gaming translation tasks. So one of the agency asked me to, can you do gaming translation? And I didn't have any experience at all, but
Okay. So they
um,
found you.
right.
Okay.
That's cool.
Yeah. Do you remember that first project? Are you able to talk about that?
That was the one, unfortunately, under NDA, so I cannot really talk about that.
Okay.
Okay. But that was the beginning for you. And how many years ago was
Yes,
that?
yes. It's already 10 years ago, so it's kind of a long time ago.
All right. Yeah. All right. That's great. Interesting. The marketing firm just gave you the responsibility and established the career.
Yeah, like it was a real simple translation, like internal documents and stuff. Because like 10 years ago, the Google Translate was so bad at that time. It's still bad. It's way worse than now. So putting anything to Google Translate is not gonna work at that time. So like even the small like emails or like kind of small messaging needs translation. If you like the marketing firm was basically international company, so there's a people in Japan who doesn't speak English, and then the people in other branches in other countries who doesn't speak Japanese. So like I had to do the translation for both parties. But yeah, that was my first translation experience, and yeah, that ultimately led me to gaming translation after that.
That's cool.
That's cool. All right. So Andrew, why don't you take this next thing? We'll get into this here.
Yep. So what is your preferred process to begin and complete a project? Do you complete a read through of the script from beginning to end before you start anything? Or do you watch footage, or do you play the game in action, like play the game fully or at least partially? Or do you just start immediately with that Excel file or whatever they give you?
In my experience, simply reading through scripts doesn't really help to fully understand the game well enough to translate it accurately. This is also because developers or publishers often don't prepare or organize scripts with the convenience of Translator in mind.
Right.
Yeah,
so there should be, that's a reality. So there should always be a combination, like script plus context explanation, or script plus playthrough video, or otherwise script plus playing the game yourself. However, translating and playing games requires completely different mental processes, I think.
Yeah.
Like, just like you said, left brain and right brain. I think playing game is more like left brain working, I guess.
Right.
And translating is more like, solely, writing stuff. So it's kind of right brain working.
Yeah.
So
creative.
I think, more creative, or like using more language specific area of your brain, I guess. So I think most translators aren't the fan of doing both at the same time, I guess. And plus you need kind of double time, because you have to play the game and you have to do the translation after that. So it's really time consuming at the same time. So I believe script plus context explanation, or script plus playthrough video is ideal for me.
Yeah.
You'll watch the game like from beginning to end, basically. Like a YouTube
or maybe I can skip some part.
Yeah, as you say, maybe you just watch when something isn't clear from the text.
Yeah. But Japanese translation is really contextual, really context driven. So kind of I need to. Maybe I have to see from start to end roughly to understand the whole thing.
Yeah.
But still I can skip some parts if there are no, dialogues or just visuals. I can skip that kind of part, I guess.
What foreign games recently, so back in the day, I remember, especially gaming in the 90s and even early 2000s, there was like a very distinct difference in the gaming worlds. There's Japanese games and there's English games. There's Western games. You have Final Fantasy and then you have Gears of War, or some shit like that. Call of Duty and Animal Crossing. You know what I mean? And do you see now, I guess due to translation and stuff, because you're bringing Western games to Japan ultimately, so do you think that those worlds are more, crossing over more than ever? Like that gap is no longer there as wide as it used to be?
Like what do you mean by gap? Like the gap between the genre, or the gap between the
if there are more Western games being translated into perfectly natural Japanese by people like you, and it's able to sell more, a Western game is able to sell more because of that within Japan, does that cause Western style gaming to become bigger in Japan. Like I think Fortnite's pretty big in Japan, and a few others. So I think there's some.
For sure. Yeah, if there are like kind of perfect translation or perfect localization happening in the game, of course, more people in Japan can reach to the game, of course. So yeah, definitely.
Okay.
How do you think? Do you think there's more Western game design influence in Japan now than when you were starting, say, 10 years ago? Or is it less or different? Yeah.
I think there are people love the Western style games, and there are people who love Japanese style games in Japan. So it's kind of separation is happening in Japan. Like some people really love Western game, while some people still loves like really Japanese game. So like even though there are more translation for Western game, and there are more Western game coming to Japan, but because of that separation, certain people still don't access to Western games. So that's kind of different stuff from translation. But it's more like I think there's more there should be more marketing efforts to those kind of people that Western game is that great. Like you kind of need to tell that kind of stuff to the people who don't have any interest in Western games, I guess.
Yeah.
I think there's also
it's funny. Go ahead.
Sorry, go ahead.
Well, I was just going to say, the marketing thing and how a product, a work of art is presented is very important. I remember when I was there in 2001, we were sort of moving from PlayStation 1 to PlayStation 2, right? The Dreamcast had already come out. But there was a hugely popular game in America. And it was, I found it there on the shelves in Japan. And it was on the Simple line. Do you remember those? The Simple games for PlayStation.
Simple, really?
Games.
Yeah,
because they were just easy to play.
There was a whole line of games that was called The Simple, and then it would be like The Simple Mahjong or The Simple Shooting, and it would be like a vertical shooter or something. And they had Tony Hawk Pro Skater on PlayStation 1. And I think it was just called The Simple Skateboarding or Skating, something like that. And I remember picking it up and it was like, $1,500. And I flipped it over and I was like, this is Tony Hawk. So it's interesting because I feel like that game really would have benefited from some marketing and language expertise applied to it to help bring it to the Japanese audience.
That also,
I didn't know that.
There's another, I think, cultural barrier that's probably been broken recently. So I skateboarded because of Tony Hawk and other. It's just that it was the time. It was when I was in high school or middle school or whatever. And when I got to Japan, when I taught English from 2006 to 2009, they'd ask you what. The other teachers, they would ask, because, you're in the schools, what bukatsu did you do? What school club did you do? And I was like, I didn't do any. I just skateboarded all the time. And it was like I was from Mars. They didn't know how to understand skateboarding. Skateboarding wasn't that big in Japan. Everybody would just say, oh, it's just dangerous sports. It's a dangerous thing to do. But now you have Japanese kids winning gold medals at the Olympics every time there's skateboarding at the Olympics in every event just about. So I think skateboarding is definitely way in a very different spot than it used to be when I was there. It felt like no one even knew what I was talking about when I talked about skateboarding. But yeah, so with Tony Hawk, it just was never going to take off at the time. If it came out now, maybe it would be different, but I think there was probably some cultural other cultural obstacles
I
there.
feel like somebody like Yoshi needed to do the work on the marketing and translation to say, like, to make this accessible to an audience there.
Yeah, that's true. I find that stuff fascinating, man. Yeah.
Yeah. So sorry to get off track there a little bit, but that was just an interesting thing. You helped me unearth this memory from 23 years ago.
Yeah.
Let's talk a little bit about your style of translation. How would you describe your own personal style, Yoshi?
That's a difficult one. But like I can differ the style depending on the game. So I don't have the specific style for translation, but as a rule of thumb, I always aim for how can I convey the storytelling to Japanese audience, and how can I capture the 100% of the game experience through translation. So that's kind of something I always keep in mind, or I always try to accomplish through translation.
Yeah. All right.
Yeah.
So
yeah.
that leads into another question we have. Actually, I'm curious if we can explore this
Yeah.
idea. What are the most difficult choices that you have to make when translating from English to Japanese?
Everything. Well, I think the most difficult part is not the single choice, but putting everything together I think is the most difficult part, especially you're working on the game translation. It's like it's there's a linear story in the game, so like missing one part can ultimately break the game experience. So like for example, you translate one line using a certain expression or style you just chosen, and it looks okay. So you move on to the next line, but as you progress, say 10 lines ahead, you start to see the bigger picture of the section and gain a deeper understanding of wording or characters. Then you realize the choice you made in the previous line wasn't quite right.
Yeah.
So you go back and revise it. And I think the translation is kind of endless cycle of that process.
Right. So I actually had a question about a game that you worked on that might fall into this category. So you worked on the game Harvest Island.
Yeah.
And it's a mystery, right? There's a mystery under there. So yeah, did you have any troubles in trying to translate but keep the mystery, or do you have to alter the sort of, I don't know, the timing of revealing important information or anything when going from one language to the other? How do you deal with that, say Harvest Island in particular?
In general, Japanese players hate spoilers. Yeah, I think it's kind of interesting factor because actually I discussed about this thing with the developer of Harvest Island before, and he basically said they don't, the audience in US doesn't really care about spoilers, and that was surprising to me.
That doesn't sound right to me. The people do care, but yeah,
it might not be to the same level. I don't know.
Yeah, maybe.
No, yeah, not in the same level. Yeah. So especially in the marketing text, there are often many indirect beating around the bush sentences used in the marketing text. So the first thing I did for Harvest Island was the translation of Steam page, but I noticed the English text on Steam page is too direct. So I basically didn't translate literally, but I changed the whole thing based on the context and based on the considering the marketing factors.
Yeah.
So that was kind of what I tried to do on Harvest Island.
This was the Steam synopsis in Japanese you're talking about.
Yes, synopsis, and there's if you scroll down, there are other descriptions about the game system or the other stuff in the game as well. So I also translated the whole thing on the Steam page.
Okay.
But yeah, the overall it's kind of direct if I literally translate it into Japanese. So I kind of tried to find a workaround or other expressions or other ways to convey the same thing in Japanese.
Right, and that's very much marketing language. When you're looking at a Steam page, it's not the same sort of literature that you work with when you're dealing with books or the game script. So that's that marketing firm experience coming to help a little bit, maybe.
Maybe, yeah.
So let me ask you about another game. It's a decision. I looked at the game Garden Window, and I noticed, because the beauty of a lot of modern games really is you can switch back and forth. I can go right back to the English, go to the Japanese. It's no problem. Way back when, you had to buy like a different system to play the other game, with some special adapter. So thank God for the modern era of just like, let me play it in whatever language I want. I appreciate that. But when I looked at Garden Window and I changed it to the Japanese characters, as opposed to the Latin alphabet, they were the characters in the font were they were different. They were much more detailed. And it kind of gave it a bit of a different vibe. So I'm curious if you have input regarding like the fonts that are used in a game, because that does affect.
I chose the Pixel font.
You
did.
Yeah.
Great. Because I was going to say, like, that definitely affects your perception of the words when you're working with different fonts. So why did you choose I don't know if you remember the specifics of this. What made you choose the font that you chose?
There are some, pixelated Japanese fonts available in the market, and as I discussed with a developer, and should we go with this font or should we go with that font? And after those discussions, this font was, chosen in the end.
Cool.
All right.
So it's kind of hard to like explain the reasonings here, but after like implementing different fonts into the game and test playing, I thought this may be the best one for Window Garden. I guess.
So it's an interesting thing to me. There's another thing I want to talk about with Window Garden, but not too long ago, Square Enix released the Final Fantasy Pixel remasters. I don't know. Have you seen these?
Yeah.
The English language font that they chose is absolutely terrible. And it really, really hurts the presentation of the game. And you can, if you go take a look at, reviews and comments on Steam and other things, it's a lot of people just being like, how do I get rid of this? How do I change this? So people are buying PC versions because they can use a mod to change to a different font. That's something closer to, say, the Super Nintendo version, because fonts matter. They really do. So you get this giant blue box for your text, and it takes up maybe 3% of the box. It's very difficult to read.
Yeah, that's an important factor. Yeah, like I collaborated with different developers in the past, and many of them doesn't really have any idea about the fonts, because they typically they want to go with the default font and whatever in the platform, but like what happens there is that if you don't choose any fonts for Japanese, the Chinese font will be chosen.
Oh man.
I've seen a lot of the games where a lot of players are complaining about the fonts, like they are, all the Japanese fonts are shown by Chinese fonts actually, and lots of players are complaining about that. So like I have kept on like emphasizing to many developers the importance of fonts.
Yeah.
So like that's a very good point actually.
It is a very important thing.
They're too like about it. They're science minded. They need the more bunke font selection.
Yeah, I mean, can you imagine opening a Spider-Man comic book and seeing Times New Roman? It's just like that doesn't belong there. So it's very important. And this brings me to something else. This is specific about Japanese. So within the game Garden Window, it opens with a character named Ali, and he uses boku as the first person pronoun.
Yes.
How do you make a decision like this of choosing to say boku in hiragana versus kanji?
Regarding kanji versus hiragana, I opted to use more hiragana and casual expressions throughout Window Garden to represent its cozy and soft mood. And it's like I aimed for making a clear stylistic difference compared to games like Chained Echoes, where there's a lot of focus on politics, wars, and historical lore. Like I use more kind of difficult expressions, or like kind of not formal, but different expressions and styles for Chained Echoes. So there's a clear difference between the two.
Yeah. No, that's great. Just similar to the font, it gives a different feel. It's got a different texture to it. That's great.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah.
Let me see. There was one more example that I was curious about. I believe this is also in Garden Window. Okay. I've noticed that there's a difference, right, in the number of characters that we need to use to express the same idea. And I was wondering if that creates many issues for you. So, for example, in Garden Window, there was the phrase water 6 plants, which is say 14 characters, I believe, right? But in this case, the water 6 plants in 14 characters are smaller. It's a mono-spaced thing, right? Or half width compared to the Japanese, which only has 11 characters. I think it was Roko no Shobutsu ni Mizu Yari Suru? That had 11 characters, which is fewer, but it takes up more space than the English does. So I'm wondering are you running into any space limitations? Because this used to be a thing in the 8 and 16-bit days, but I don't know how much it affects things now.
Character limitations are always head scratcher. And I think this is true for translations in many languages, I think. And when I actually worked as an in-house language lead at agency before, and I saw many translators struggling with this issue. But however, Japanese might be a bit easier to work with. Work with this stuff compared to other languages, because we have, hiragana, katakana, and kanji. So we have, kind of 3 variations basically.
Yeah.
For example, if hiragana or katakana version doesn't fit in the given user interface or given space, we can use a kanji workaround, which is typically shorter. But it's important to consider that even if I find a kanji workaround that is close to the hiragana or katakana version, it may not mean exactly the same thing. So, I think it's happening for every language still. I think this is one of the tasks that really challenges the translator's technical skills. Regardless of the language, I guess.
As well as artistic skills, yeah. It's just interesting because I know like they talked in the early days of RPGs, when a lot of RPGs were coming to the English language speaking community. Ted Woolsey was the main guy working on Super Nintendo in that era for Square Enix. And he said like he had a lot of issues trying to make those scripts work in English because the character limitations were different. It's just he didn't have as many options. So I was curious to see how relevant that is today, and it certainly is. But it's interesting to know, Japanese has more flexibility with that.
Yeah.
Cool.
Do you have any go ahead. You got one more in this series, right?
Well, the last game I wanted to ask a little bit about was Chained Echoes.
Yeah.
So this is an interesting one, right? Because the developers didn't ask me anything on Reddit before the game released. And I had asked some questions about the language of production, because it's a group of German developers, but they worked with English to start, right? Because I think for most folks, English is going to give them the broadest market, right? They can bring it to the most people that way. How do you feel about this focus on English as sort of a universal, most marketable language for translation and writing in games? How do you feel that affects games and development?
It's actually an interesting one, because I didn't have any doubts when working on Chained Echoes. Because in my impression, English is much more widely used among German people than in Japan, obviously. So it seems natural for them to use English as if they were their native language, allowing the game to reach a wider audience before even translated.
Yeah. Okay.
That said, I don't think English is the universal gaming language anymore, because I believe it's now both English and Chinese.
I've noticed it's been a real rapid growth for the Chinese gaming market.
Right.
The big game now.
I've noticed more and more AAA games are being developed in Chinese. Like recently, do you know the game called Wukong?
Yeah, Black Myth Wukong. Yep.
Right, exactly. That's the typical example of like a Chinese. I think it's AAA game, right?
Yeah, definitely.
I don't know what their budget is, but it certainly looks AAA.
Yeah, it looks like it for sure. Yeah.
This is kind of the beginning. This is kind of the beginning of the big AAA coming out of China. So this is a huge success, and I think it may be the beginning of a wave.
Could be.
Yeah. So I think it's now English and Chinese, and unfortunately German isn't on the list yet, and probably never will be, I guess.
Probably not.
Just like Japanese is unlikely to become one of the universal gaming languages in the future. Yeah, I think this seems inevitable given the demographics of gaming culture worldwide.
Yeah. China's got quite the population, so
yeah, they got the power.
Right.
Japan's got what they call soft power, though, like pop culture power. I think they still have a lot of that. Do you have any kind of translators
China?
That's true. Do you have any translators you look up to?
No specific translators out there, but yeah, there are some games or there are some games which the translation is really good, and I was very impressed about that.
Yeah.
What games are those? Can you tell us about those?
One of them it's kind of old one already, and it's Korean game actually. But there's a game called what was the name? Let's see.
A Korean game.
What was the name of the? It's Korean game. It's the Rhapsody of Zephyr. That's the English names. I just remembered.
Rhapsody of Zephyr.
The Rhapsody of Zephyr.
Okay.
It's the Japanese version is Nishikaze no Kyoshikyoku.
Okay.
I'm taking a quick.
It's old game. It's already.
Okay. It
20
looks like a
years ago, I
turn-based
guess.
RPG, classic JRPG style.
You liked this Japanese translation?
Yeah. The translation of that game really
Oh,
nailed
this game
it,
was
and I
translated into Japanese. You were a
incredibly
fan of this?
impressed when I played it because I didn't sense any trace of translation.
Right.
In like all the dialogues flowed as if the Japanese writer had written it from the scratch.
Korean and Japanese are similar
Yeah.
languages, so maybe that was helpful in that regard.
But like, I did some research and I learned that the publisher took an extra year only for polishing every part of translation after the initial
That's
work.
awesome.
Wow, that's impressive.
So
That is cool.
So it's not really the style, but it's the dedication to quality, both the publisher and the translation team is something I've always admired.
Yeah,
Okay.
that's definitely when people respect the art and give it the time it needs, it makes a difference. It really does.
So Mike and I mean, everybody our age pretty much have been playing Mario throughout the years, and they've always been pretty good. It's Nintendo; they've had good translations, but I can tell there was something with around, I guess, I don't know, recent years, especially Switch years. Mario Odyssey, I played that one in English, and I was like, wow, this is so smooth. Like this English is, this is like, I could tell there's been an evolution in translation. Because it was always fine. It was always, pretty good, passable, but there was just an extra level of smoothness and, I don't know, coziness and, yeah, I don't know. It felt very natural and real and genuine English. Mario Odyssey and all the Switch games.
Yeah,
So
yeah. The current translation localization team for Nintendo of America, they have very strong work. They do very good
dude,
work. Absolutely.
incredible.
I actually have questions to you guys.
Okay.
Yeah. Well, what I have noticed recently, like I sometimes see the Reddit on and there's like a thread of localization, and some people hate the westernization of localization. But like when I read the Reddit, there's a heated discussion on Reddit, and like when I read that, like it seems to me that they may like the translation like translation. You know what I mean? Like like localizers often try to as you said, like to make the translation flow like as if it was written in the native language.
Right.
But like when I read the thread, maybe they like the kind of literal direct translation, even it sounds awkward, and because like they can feel the universe of Japanese. I think I don't know. That's that's my impression.
So there is that too. There are those who constantly talk about a literal translation, but I do think that a lot of those people have never really sat down with a literal translation, because it generally doesn't read well.
Yeah.
And it's not easy to enjoy. There's not really a good flow to the text, which is funny because you said the thing that impressed you most about the Zephyr game was how natural everything was, and you would never have even guessed that it had been translated because it spoke to you in your language. And that's the thing. Most people and publishers, naturally, because that's where more money is going to be, want the thing that speaks to people in their language. And these people want something that is exotic. They want something that is other. They want something that is Japanese. But the real thing is, if you really want that, I recommend studying Japanese.
Because like it's kind of interesting discussion, because like in Japan, if any localizers try to do literal translation, direct translation, insisting, oh, this is accurate, this is how the English text is, and if they deliver the translation to the audience, there's a huge backlash happen in Steam or something, because like Japanese people never say like, never want any translation to be, translation like translation.
Yeah, nothing
They
like a
want,
machine.
right. So like, it's kind of interesting discussion happening in Reddit because like that, as I mentioned, they may want the translation to be like exotic, as you said, because like they can feel the different universe. So it's kind of, yeah. I know there's like like huge discussion or like heated things happening in Reddit or other social network, but yeah, that's my impression.
So you're saying basically there's an audience within America that wants a translation that still sounds foreign because they like how foreign that feels, but that audience doesn't really exist within Japan. They never want a translation that feels foreign. Is that pretty much it?
That's yes. I know like some people who is really familiar with the translated text, and there's small portion of people likes the like a translation like style. You know what I mean? Like, the Japanese writer doesn't write in that style, but some people likes the translated style text.
Yeah.
But the majority of people hopes the translation to flow like again as if the Japanese writer wrote from scratch. So I think I think we have the same, like we are on the same page. I mean, translators and audience are same page that we hope the translation to flow naturally as if in the Japanese language, as if it was written in Japanese language.
I think people.
So I think there's some difference
Go ahead.
in Western market and Japanese market.
People our age too. Mike and my age, we're in our 40s now, and we were growing up a lot in the 90s, and you would get some games every now and again, especially in the early 90s, that had pretty bad translations, but we ended up loving those because honestly, ultimately gave it a lot of character, really.
We loved them for the wrong reasons.
Yeah, maybe for the wrong reasons, but it was
Yeah.
still. I remember those times so fondly. I don't think that should continue on forever and ever, but I think that people our age there might be some people that like the translated feeling of it more than natural. Although I did really appreciate that Mario natural translation and all that, but in other games as well.
So
I see.
I'd like to bring up an example here, right? So there's a game that was only recently localized for Western and English-speaking audiences. It's the River City Girls. This was a Super Famicom game that had never made its way to America. And maybe about a year and a half ago, it came over. And it had two different translations, if I remember correctly. One of them was what they called a literal translation. So they basically were like, look, here you go. You've got both options. You've got an actual localization and you've got a literal script. And I could take a look at the literal script. And I think that this is something that they can do because this is not a text-heavy game. It doesn't require as much time or effort for anyone to translate this game versus, say, an RPG. But I've got a screen up here. I'm looking at it from River City Girls 0, which was originally called Shin Neketsu Koha Kunio Tachi no Banka. There's a line here where you've got your Kunio delinquents squatting, and there's a couple of cops. And he says, "You're such a persistent old man." Now that I could see being like, okay, whatever the translation or whatever the original Japanese script is, like, yeah, okay, those ideas might work more naturally in Japanese. You're such a persistent old man. However, if you consider...
You never say that.
Yeah, in English, we're talking about juvenile delinquents of a high school age, right? They're a bunch of punks. they're not going to use the word persistent. That's the kind of multisyllabic word that is not generally a go-to choice for the vocabulary of a high school juvenile delinquent. But it's also not a natural choice for an English speaker of any level to describe an old man. So it's really an interesting thing, because I think that what some people are getting out of this is like, oh, by seeing this phrase, you're such a persistent old man, while it doesn't work in English really at all, it does give me a window into the Japanese language.
But that's us, because we're real deep in this world. Like the average gamer might not think about that at all. You know what I mean?
Or if someone is young enough, like we were, in a way, if you're exposed to what would be considered unnatural language early enough and often enough, then it becomes natural for you. That's just how language works.
I think.
Yeah, exactly.
Talking about the different styles of
go ahead.
language, different styles of translation too. I asked this a lot in season 1, actually, to people, but I've noticed that like outside of Disney and I guess some Hollywood movies, and I know the gap's closing, like I said, but it just feels like America and the West in general really seeks out Japanese content. You know, we have huge anime conventions. Japanese culture is huge, et cetera, but it doesn't feel like the opposite exists in Japan. Like there's no Marvel convention in Tokyo. Where's the DC Comics Batman convention in Tokyo? It feels like Japanese people, by and large, are fully content with their own pop culture and nothing else outside of Disney. Disney is the outlier. Maybe I'm overgeneralizing this, but do you think this is somewhat true?
Well, there are people who loves Marvel series. Mm-hmm. So the Marvel and Disney and are outliers, and also again there's some people who loves Western culture, like Western animation or Western, Hollywood movie or dramas, and so
that's true.
I don't think there are, people are just satisfied with Japanese culture, and there are, there are people who even prefer Western culture, and they have dreams to go to other countries, especially like English-speaking countries, and go to other countries and to immerse themselves to that culture. Mm-hmm. But like in terms of translation, I think like nobody wants the translation to sound like Western style, So I think that movement, I'll say that's movement in happening on Reddit is very Western specific, I guess.
There's so many levels. Go ahead, Mike.
No, I was just gonna say, like I said before, right? I always feel like if you want to experience something in its original language, then you should study and learn its original language. But what I'd really like to see from developers is the option to switch languages, maybe on the fly. Like I can be playing my game in English and just press one button and see the other language that I've chosen. When they did Halo, this is not a language thing, but Halo had an anniversary edition on the Xbox One or 360, and they had the old version running at the same time, and you could press the button and see the old version from 2001 while you were playing the new version from 2006 at any time. And I think that would really go a long way towards helping language students and the crowd that wants a literal translation, because really that's what they should be doing rather than looking for "you're such a persistent old man." I feel like they should be looking for a good textbook and a teacher.
Yeah. There's another.
Yeah, I've noticed.
You go ahead, Yoshi.
Oh yeah, I've noticed like there are a lot of expressions in English language that don't have any equivalent in Japanese.
Yeah.
Like,
and vice versa.
You know, if I take the simple example, like if, for example, if you go to the mountain, if you climb a mountain, and if you reach the top of the mountain and see the beautiful scenery from the top of the mountain, and you can say like, "Oh my God, it's so beautiful," or something like that. And the problem is how to translate "Oh my God" into Japanese.
Yeah.
There's no expression similar to "Oh my God." Like you can literally, right? Like so, it becomes just onomatopoeia or something like that. So like you completely need to rephrase that part. So, like, I think that's how localization should be. But yeah, like again, as I saw that the Reddit discussion is kind of really interesting to me because like some people insist the 100% accurate translation without any consideration of context.
Oh my God, it's just not a good idea. These people making this point haven't studied the languages, I think.
Yeah, that's really the big thing is that, and then there'll be say 2 or 3 people who are sort of guiding the community in this way. Like maybe those 2 or 3 people have studied the language some, and they'll go and bring up the translation, and they'll say like, "Oh, this was changed to this, and you should be angry about this," and then they get their more views and they get more money, and it just it's silly. It's kind of like yeah, but learn the language. That's really the key.
There's another level too to this, and I'll try to say this as gingerly as I can, but people of probably certain political affiliation, I think that they sort of see Japan as not being affected by politics and having to control, or not control, but God, this is hard to say gingerly, like to the way we've progressed over the years, let's say that. And let's say like the extreme example of like having to cover up an underage girl. Like this is an extreme example, but just to get the point across. I think that there's a certain subset of people that they want Japan to stay pure in some way, and they don't want it to be affected by our They don't want it to be affected by our politics too much, because we're already, so impure these days because of, God forbid, this is probably not translatable, but God forbid, we cover up an underage girl. But this is the kind of thing that these idiots are complaining about. And, things like that, or things like that, and it's just fun. Like there's not everybody, but yeah, I think there's a certain subset of people into Japanese culture that they're pro Japan in a weird way. They want it to be their version of pure.
Those black trucks.
Yeah, what they think is pure. That's what they want it to remain as. Which is it's an odd subject, but I don't know. I thought I would cover it.
Yeah, it's big. it's a big, very complex issue. There's a lot to discuss.
Yeah,
but
right.
Yeah, there's a lot of people who look at Japan, in some ways, right, what we would consider a progressive or more accepting culture. Is in conflict with a conservative culture, and they view Japan as being conservative in the ways that, say, America used to be. Generally, though, this means though fewer rights and opportunities for women, or things like that, right? Or just casual sexism, right? And I, in my time in Japan, I definitely felt this is a man's country. But like that stuff changes everywhere. It doesn't stay the same. So even if Japan is 10, 20 years, it's not really behind, but in a comparison of how our cultures are moving, it might be considered, right, conservative in the way American culture was.
But Japan
And they
does
want that.
update very quickly too, I find. So I don't know.
Yeah.
It's hard to me it's hard to gauge at times.
Yeah.
You know? What do you think, Yoshi?
Sorry. Very complex issue.
What do you mean by like update? What do you mean by update?
I think Japan, this is why Japan's so interesting, one of the reasons. Japan will hold on to old ideals, but at the same time, just always kind of updating the culture in some ways, I think.
I can use an example.
Maybe there's still some ways to go with gender equality, but, it's not like Japan's the only country in the world like that. There's so many countries like that. I mean, America's got problems too. Anyway, what was your example, Mike?
So an example of this, right? I first went to Japan in 2001. And I was very excited because arcades were thriving in Japan. You could go to any train station and find an arcade. And I loved it. But there was a problem. Anytime I went into the arcade, I basically had about a half-hour timer before I had to leave because they were full of cigarette smoke.
Yeah.
I could not deal with it. The tobacco smoke everywhere. No matter where I went, it was there. When I went back in 2005, I noticed it was a little bit less. When I left...
There's no smoke. There's no smoke in arcades.
I went back in 2013. All of a sudden, it was they had these campaigns outside, like, don't walk with a cigarette, blah, blah, blah. And they put smokers in these tiny little playpens on the street. And I was like, this is the big shift. This is it. All of a sudden, it's like, okay, smoke was everywhere. And I think pretty quickly smoke is going to be nowhere.
That was quick too, yeah. Yeah.
And that's the thing, like, that's I think that's an example of what Andrew is saying, that Japan will hold on to something for a very long time, and then all of a sudden, update.
Yeah.
Let's make this change.
I see.
Yeah, and with buildings too. I mean, this is not anything political, but just like America just holds on to old ass buildings forever that are not historical cool sites. It's just they're just old.
We don't have an earthquake code.
Yeah, old apartment buildings. So this is an example. Japan will just, seemingly destroy a building, no problem, with nobody in there, and like build a new one, like very quickly. I feel like, I don't know. That's just another.
But America will try to protect any building that's like 25 years or older. They'll be like, this is a part of our history.
It depends on what kind of building it you're referring to. Like if it's kind of historical building, of course the government basically banned people to destroy it. But like I know what you mean, because like like even in my town, many old buildings are being renovated because simply it's kind of clean inside, because they renovate those buildings just because they're becoming old. So like I don't know that it's same in other countries.
It's generally not in America. They'll hold on to a school building for however long and do nothing to update it or improve it or renovate it.
Yeah.
There's just this is what you got. Deal with it.
Yeah, it's terrible in some areas.
And then they almost never. I mean, I lived in New York City for God knows how long, right? And we kept seeing they were talking about this is the schools, right? They would say there's more students, we need more schools. They wouldn't really make more schools. I never saw them build a new school in my entire life in New York City. I never saw them build a new school building. Not
a single one. And I'm from like Alabama and Georgia, like way in the country. So you would expect us to have less money. And so I was like, the area's poor and they just don't rebuild stuff. But hearing that's the situation in New York as well, it's kind of interesting to see that. So
once again, Yoshi, thank you very much for talking with us today. We really appreciate your perspective. It's a unique one for us.
Thank you very much.
So thank you. And for those of you listening, just to remind you, our guest today has been Yoshiaki Ikeda, English to Japanese translator who's worked on such games as Harvest Island, Window Garden, Pocket Mirror Golden Traum, Arcadian Atlas, Bendy and the Dark Revival, and the big one we'll also talk about another time, hopefully, is Chained Echoes. So please reach out to him via LinkedIn if you would like to hire his services or discuss his consulting work. Thank you again, Yoshi.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Yes, thank you. So that's pretty much it, everybody. And stay tuned for more Season 3 content. This is Gaming Gaiden. I'm Andrew. I'll see you later.
See you.